Hello, I am Brooke Welsh. I teach 5th grade science in Waukon, Iowa. This is my first year teaching 5th grade science, and I teach 4 sections of science with about 20 students each. So I see just about 78 5th grade students in a day. And before this, I've taught a lot of different sections of special education. So very new to teaching science, but I'm enjoying it. I've dove right in. I am excited to take this Eii class because I do feel like this is a subject area within science that I don't have a lot of experience teaching. So as far as conservation goes and environmental issues with our watershed. So I am happy to be here. I'm excited to have already watched some of your videos, but I'm very at the basic beginner level, if you will. So I started my unit right before we got shut down and we were told to stay home. So I began with the level 1 part of my unit, and I really enjoyed this with my students, and they did as well. So we started with the Name the Motivators activity, and I gave them the pictures right away. We talked about motivation in different areas of our lives first, and then I said to look at the pictures and to name what's motivating each picture. And I did this in their small lab groups. They sit at tables of 4 and they were able to discuss this. And I did not give them any of the definitions at first. Then I introduced that definitions to them. We read through them as a class, and then they went through and matched the motivated word bank to their definitions that they've come up with. This was a good activity to get us started with talking about why we make the choices we do, especially when it impacts our environment and our communities. From there, we went into talking about the Lorax, and we did the read aloud, which was very engaging for the students. They enjoyed taking parts of the roles. A little awkward at first with 5th grade, but they enjoyed it as we continued on. So we discussed the story elements, and we read the story together. Some of them felt like they had read this book over and over and over again, but it worked perfectly because it was during the week of Earth Day and Dr. Seuss and all of that good stuff. So we read the book out loud, and then we moved into talking about the Lorax, and we talked about resources and products, and we did the Lorax book. So something that they really weren't familiar with was non-renewable resources, what that meant, which we had talked about throughout the year, but I don't think we really hit it home. So we really talked about what non-renewable resources were, what types of non-renewable resources came up within the Lorax, and then also then what a product was. They really weren't familiar with those definitions, so that was important that we got them up to par on those words and definitions. So we worked through the Lorax books. They took their time with those, and we talked a lot about environmental issues versus problems and where those arose in the book throughout the book. So we also then watched the Lorax movie as a class reward that we had earned. And so it was good to talk about the differences between the book and the movie. There are quite a few that are the same, but there are also new problems and issues that come up. So we had lots of discussions about those, lots of discussions about environmental issues. That led us into the graphic organizer that we were given in class. I found this a little challenging because we talked about the secondary or the sub issues, and at first they couldn't really get their head wrapped around that, but I think that really helped us move into level 2. So working through that graphic organizer was helpful. This is as far as I got. Well, we were able to do about 2 or 3 lessons into level 2. So I take that back. We did read the book Above and Below. I don't know the author of that book right off the top of my head. I have it in my classroom, but this talks about some of the effects of water below the water as well as above the water. So this was booked just to kind of get us introduced to the water cycle. And then we reviewed the water cycle as a class and just really talked about with the KWL chart, what have you learned about the water cycle so far? What do you know? What do you not know? They did have a lot of prior learned information about the water cycle, but they still really viewed it as this just one continuous cycle. So it rains, it pours, it goes up, it rains, it pours, it goes up. And they didn't have a whole lot of vocabulary to back their language when we were discussing that. One thing in my science classroom is we really do emphasize the language that's used when we're describing what we understand and when we're giving reasoning to support our claims. So this was one thing that they really needed help with, was this vocabulary. So we did play the game, The Incredible Journey, which was a fantastic game, and it was one of the last lessons we did before we were sent home. So I'm glad that we were able to do that because I think they really enjoyed it. They were getting frustrated when they got stuck somewhere. I did only allow them to get stuck 5 times, and if they got sent to the same place 5 times, they needed to go somewhere else. But I wanted them to see that pattern of where did you get stuck, why did you get stuck there. And we had a lot of really great conversations about how it wasn't really a cycle, and why it wasn't a cycle per se. And they really opened their eyes to see that water maybe doesn't move through the whole cycle all the time. So we had some really good conversations about that, and that was a great game. So we had just moved into color coding our cycle. So they took their sheet and they used a colored pencil to color code their cycle, and then they were making those chains for us to hang in our classroom. So that really made a really great discussion over the water cycle, a good review of the water cycle, as we then would transition to issues and environmental problems in our water cycle. So after this, I was planning to go into talking about the nitrogen cycle, which is something that none of them had some prior knowledge about. So they all kind of looked at me like, nitrogen? Like, I think one student said something about poop, animal poop, and nitrogen, which was good place to start, but they didn't really understand that there was a nitrogen cycle. And when we talked about that through KWL discussion, they didn't have a lot of information. So I was going to move then into talking about what the nitrogen cycle is, and then we were going to play the Incredible Journey game with the nitrogen cycle so that we could compare and contrast and also talk about maybe the differences between the two. I wasn't going to hit too much on the nitrogen cycle, but I did want them to be able to understand that it's there, what it is, and then kind of move on from there. I do like to do a lot of writing in science. I incorporate it as much as I can. So after we had finished this, I wanted to see some student writing, and I wanted them to be able to describe their understanding of the water cycle through a creative writing piece. So I was going to give them a day or two to describe how a droplet of water would move through the writing cycle, or the water cycle, and to be as creative as I could with that. So that was something I had planned to do with them, and to see if some of that language improved from our original class discussions to later then in their writing were they able to use some different vocabulary. So that was kind of what I had intended for level 2. I wish I had some student work to show, because we did kind of start the poster that we had done at the EII training of how are you related to water, and I had some really creative pictures on that poster as we had gotten started. They also really liked the water cycle poster in our room, and they were making sticky notes and putting it up on the board around it, just describing how they interacted with water around that as well. They kind of took that and ran with it. That was their own thing. But I'm not allowed back into my classroom, so I can't grab any of that work. But I wish I could show it to you. I also don't have my EII binder, which is difficult, but we're rolling with it. So as far as level 3 went, I wanted to introduce what a watershed was. I doubt that my students really have a good foundation or understanding of what that is, or have heard the term before. So we were going to start with the KWL, introduce the watershed, bring in some readings, and then I really wanted to do some articles. So break out, have each of my lab groups take a different article, and I started modifying the analysis web that was provided for us and kind of getting it so that my students would understand it just a little bit more. And I want them to take that modified web and work with their groups to determine who are the players in the problem, what's happening, what are the two sides, and have some good discussions about what are things happening in our area that are affecting our watershed, because we live right next to the Mississippi, so we should be able to think of many issues and many things that are happening. So I had planned to use that modified analysis web, and then to talk about the pollution of the watershed demonstration. So I really liked what we did in the EII class, where we each had a little film canister of something, and I liked the story that was read. And I think that's a great visual for students to see exactly what's happening to our water. So I wanted to do that to show them, like, each of us is contributing every single day. When we were reading the Lorax, we did have the conversation, do you think you're affecting the Mississippi River some way today? And some students said yes and some students said no, but their claims were very interesting. So I think that that would be a great demonstration for them to see as we talk about these articles and what we are noticing. So from there, I liked the Water Savers game, so I'd like to see my students play that and to see that the ideas that they get from that, and if they can piece it together a little bit more. I know it helped me in class. And then from there, I wanted to move into some action steps. So we did the visual demonstration of what it looks like and just things that they're going to be very familiar with, like, you know, the boat oil and all of these things. So what can we do to better environment? And can we talk about recycling and what are some things? So this is where I kind of wanted to run with their ideas and their questions and build their learning and understanding from there. So we were going to kind of take some different approaches to their research and different approaches to some investigations from there. So I can't quite say what that would look like, but I do enjoy this part of our instruction because I feel like students lead their own learning and they come out understanding a little more. But for now, that's where I'm at with this unit. I was hoping to finish this unit, and I will say that right now, this unit, as I started teaching it, I began teaching this right after talking about the human body. We had done a human body unit, and then next we talk about the earth phases, or the moon phases, excuse me. So going from human body to this to moon phases doesn't quite align, but we do have a unit in the fall where we talk about mixtures and solutions, and I think that this would fit really well into some of the investigations we did during that time. So next year I do want to teach this more in the fall than in the spring, so that's just some feedback I've been thinking of as well. So I'm very at the basic beginning level of this unit, piecing my instruction together. Again, my first year teaching 5th grade. I love teaching science, but I'm still learning, I'm still improving. So I'm excited to see your videos, how you're applying this in your classroom, and what's working for you. So hopefully when I get back to my students, which I'm sure we're all feeling that we hope we get back soon, I can show some more student work and we can continue from there. But stay safe, everyone, and I'm glad that we're able to collaborate in some way. So thank you.